make,
which
I'll just make sure I okay the recording. Good.
There we go.
which is lovely. We were just chatting a little bit before you popped on here, just saying hello and gathering just like thoughts about the book, and everyone is in awe of the final product here. So we were just in the midst of talking about that.
Oh, well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. I don't know. Kelly, do you want to start off with something with specific, or do you guys, should we just, sorry.
No, that's okay. We typically, Ivana and I will start off the conversation with just a few questions, and then we will take questions from the group as well. And we have a few people who have submitted questions ahead of time, and then a few people probably will chime in here and there throughout the chat as we get going. And this, we've all read the book. So we love to hear spoilers. So you don't need to tiptoe around any information. Like, we've all read it. And so this is a great time to share all the good stuff. So just to kind of kick us off, are you able to talk a little bit about your inspiration for the book and how this came to be? I know it was a long time in the making.
It was back in 2002. I was with my parents up in Saskatchewan. That's where I'm originally from. And we went to a place called the Cypress Hills, which is part of Saskatchewan. But if you're driving along on this flat prairie, and then suddenly come to this really unusual topography where you have these beautiful, deep rolling hills, and they're covered with pine trees. But there was where the Northwest Mounted Police set up their very first fort. And there was a reason behind that fort being built. And they were telling us, the docents were dressed and they were telling us about that event. So it was, of course, most of them were dressed as men. I mean, they were dressed as mounted police. But I was drawn to a young woman who was standing over on a hill. And she was she was just standing there, and she looked so beautiful. She was dressed as a Crow Native woman. And she was telling us the story of how she had been newly married to this white fur trader in Farwell, and how she was 16 years old. And she was there at the time when there was this massacre that happened of 40 Nakota people that were massacred or murdered. And she then told me then she was telling us how she went in and saved 4 of these women who were going to be raped and murdered. And I had this chill go through my body, the same that I've had with my other books when I knew it was the right thing to write about. I just had this deep chill go through me, and I thought, that's going to be that's my next book. That's the one I was supposed to write after The Kitchen House. So that's what I thought I was going to be doing. And then when I started to do a little bit of research and discovered that she actually lived, and that there was more documentation on her life, I was so excited. But I had to finish up The Kitchen House. And I thought that I finished The Kitchen House. It was published. I did my promotion. And then I went out to the Crow Reservation. I had been doing some communication earlier, but I thought that I would begin the book. But when I was out, the first time I went out to the Crow Reservation, I couldn't feel her the way I knew I was going to have to feel her in order to be able to write about her. But I couldn't feel her because there was this blanket that was in front of me. And Jamie from The Kitchen House was standing there, and he was essentially saying, no, you have to write my story next. So away I went. I went up to Philadelphia and started to do research up there. But through all of those years from 2002 on, I had contacts with Crow elders and Crow people and Crow Mary's great granddaughter, and maintained those contacts, and gradually just gathered a whole lot of the research and a whole lot of the information that I had. So that's basically how I came to write Crow Mary. After I finished Jamie's story, then I went back again to the Crow Agency, and then I knew immediately that it was going to come, that she was going to come, that she was ready, and it was her time. So that's where I was with that.
Well, I love that. And Ivana and I, and many of us here have read your previous books as well. And when we saw that Crow Mary was coming out, we were like, oh, yay. We were like, what has she been up to all these years? And after reading the book, we were like, well, of course, this is what she's been up to. You know, the amount of research that you have clearly put into this is staggering. And Lori, are you free to ask your question pertaining to the research about this?
Yeah. So I'm Lori. I am actually here in Montana.
Hi, Lori.
Hi. I just loved the story and how well you wrote the setting, and it just had such a strong sense of place. So I was just wondering more about the research that went into not only talking to Nedra and what her input was, as well as did you travel beyond the Crow Reservation? You wrote Montana very well.
Thank you. I really love Montana. But you know, it was interesting, Lori, because we were able to go to what was once her land and Farwell's land. And we would go there, and I would just sit on the soil. I would just sit on the ground, and I brought back some rocks from their land. And the reason that I would do that is because when I was writing The Kitchen House in Glory, the land was so important. It was almost as though the souls could come up through the soil and sort of ground me in the story. And that's why going out there was so important. But also, my very first communication was with Nedra. And then I was put in touch with Plays with His Face, George Reed. And he was a Crow elder, and my Crow mentor now, Janice Wilson, was mentored by George Reed. But George has since gone to the other side camp. And he was just an amazing, he was just so encouraging. And I actually have a letter, if you're interested in hearing it, that he wrote. It's very short, but this is the kind of encouragement that I was given, not just by George or not just by Nedra, but by every Crow elder that I spoke with. They were just unbelievably warm and welcoming. So I was so, so grateful for that. But in 2002, this was after my first visit with George, he sent me this letter. Kathy, thanks for the card. It was very thoughtful. I had sent him a thank you card for his time with me. I also asked him at that time when I pray, because I pray before I write. And I said, are there any special prayers or any special way I should say prayers or anything like that? And he suggested that I use some sage. And so I said, okay. So he said, I have sent you 2 stems of sweet sage. Better use it all at once or use it sparingly, because that is all I can do for this one cause. My prayers and thoughts are with you in your quest for information about my people. Don't be alarmed if you feel a presence or you detect something. My father always said, I have 4 mothers who watch over me. It is from these powers that I am allowed to use this sweet sage. If the good Lord wills, I may get to visit with you again come January. Remember that I am with you in your wants, wishes, and desires. Take care. Plays with His Face. So that tells you just some of the encouragement that I was given, some of the help that I was given. And I was so grateful for that.
That's awesome.
Did you ask me a question, Lori, and I missed it? Or did I answer your question?
You pretty much answered it. It's good.
Okay, good.
I was telling
right.
the week I started this book, I actually was in Fort Benton for work.
Oh, really?
It was awesome standing, like Fort Benton's down in the canyon. So standing up above the canyon, looking at like, oh, that is exactly where Crow Mary would be. And I'll actually be on the Crow Reservation in 2 weeks. So your character is following me all summer.
Well, that's kind of wonderful to hear. There are so many amazing places where you see buffalo jumps. I'm sure you've seen buffalo jumps. And just the whole topography there, I just found beautiful and wonderful. Yeah. Lucky you. Mm.
Well, that is such a moving letter, like so much beauty in every word that he shared with you and sent. And what an honor to be witness to that. So thank you for sharing.
And I think so many people were saying too, right before you hopped on, how much they appreciate the letter that was in the front. You know, Wendy was mentioning too in her review of your book, she got lots of comments about how that letter in the front is just so important to readers to just know how much support you received.
Yes.
And it's clear through your writing and through all the details how much you learned. You know, were all of your other books the same amount or type of research, or was this, you know, a different type of a, you know, experience?
Well, it was different. The main difference is that I was further away from the land. When I wrote the first two books, I was right on the land where this might have happened, right? South Central Virginia. And so I could often just be outdoors and just feel the land and just let nature take its course, right? So when I would go out to Montana, I would just almost be hungry for that. And it was always a spiritual experience for me to be there. The people themselves, George, as an example, plays with his face. When I first met him, he was a very intimidating appearing man. He stepped out of his truck. He had on yellow and black cowboy boots and a great big black Stetson, and he wouldn't look at me. And I didn't realize then that married pro men do not look at married women, or in the eye, right? But that was I found that very intimidating at first. But when we actually sat down that first day, I said, I have a lot of questions, because he had said he was willing to answer them. I said, I have a lot of questions and I don't want to insult you with any of them. And he looked at me. Well, he didn't look at me, but he kind of out of the side of his eye peeked up from under his hat. And he said, shoot, meaning go ahead. And so I just did. And he was just so willing to. I asked about women's menstruation. I asked about, really things that I now know would have been very sensitive for him to answer, but he did answer all of the questions that I asked. So there was that. You asked if there was a difference between, or what there was a difference with, right? As soon as I started to do some studying on the Crow culture, I knew I was in over my head. I really did. I thought, oh, this is just way too, but I knew I had to do it. So I just pursued, I just kept on going. But for me, the idea was to gather all of the information, because I knew that if this story was going to be told, it would have to be coming from her. I was going to have to feel her, and I was going to have to allow her to come in and tell the story. So I knew that I had to study every nuance. I had to know all of the things that I needed to know, so she would feel comfortable allowing me to tell her story. And that was the goal. And so that is really what required such intensive research. So once I set that stage, once I felt full, then I was able to sit and say, okay, I'm ready for you. And then she came.
And how long did that take from the time you met with him to the time you finished?
Well, this letter is from 2002, and I was published in 2023. Yeah. Now, I didn't just meet with him. There were other elders, of course, that I met with, many other elders that I met with. Yeah.
Amazing. It's so clear. Everybody can tell. It's just those nuances that you mentioned. We were talking about those before you hopped on, how even just from the way, she speaks and just her little innuendos, it's so clear that you know what it's like you were her. Yeah.
Well, what seems to happen is that once the character comes, I no longer, now there were points of the story because there was documentation on her life. So I knew there was a certain, we had to meet certain criteria. We had to get there. But to get there, I had to get out of the way so she could tell her story the way she wanted it told. And she started with herself as a young child. My editors weren't that keen on that. They felt that we should maybe get started when she was already 16, just marrying Abe Farwell. But she really wanted nothing to do with that. She wanted to get started when she was young. She wanted to tell the story of her grandmother. And in retrospect, I'm so glad that she stuck to her guns, where she really wanted it told her way, because it gave all of us a chance to understand what it meant for her to walk away from her culture and attempt to assimilate into the white culture, and what, the differences for her. And I think we could feel it more because we knew her as a child as well.
We were talking about in our book club discussion, many of us were wondering how common the practice was for Indigenous women to be married to white or, French men. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I'm certainly not an authority on this, but I can tell you what I learned. And the surprising thing for me was it was more with the Métis group of people, where a lot of the trappers would marry some of the Native women, and they would cohabitate with them and even have families with them. And then when their time was up, when they'd made enough money or they decided to go back east, they would just head on back east. And sometimes if the Native woman was lucky, quotation marks here, they would pass her off to a friend of theirs or someone else they knew that would be good to her. But otherwise, she was just abandoned. And that happened often. That was not uncommon. In Pro Mary's instance, it was very unusual that he actually married her. And there's documentation of that. So, and that they stayed together the way they did. It was very unusual. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Kelly, you had a question about Farwell as well. Are you free to ask that?
I would be, but I don't, I'm trying to remember my question about Farwell.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for being that way, because then I'm just right there with you.
I can come back to you.
Yeah.
Yes, if you come back to me, that would be great.
Yes, we'll circle back to you.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I can read it from our chat. Would you like me to do that?
Oh, is that what? Okay, so that's what I put in the chat. The
Yeah.
We're
Okay,
farewell.
I'm sorry. I apologize. It's been a long work day.
That's
Hey, we're all
okay.
there too.
I guess it really wasn't necessarily a question, but what it was is this is my typical brain. I woke up at 3 a.m. and this is truly what I thought about. And I thought, here's Farwell, and he assimilated and was, able to live amongst the Crow, and the Crow seemed to accept him to be a trader and that kind of thing. However, when it finally kind of came down to it, and he, I kind of felt let down by him at first because he let this happen to these Nakota women. And I thought to myself how that relates to things today in our world, how we live among groups of people. We're their allies, but we also kind of support them, and we would live amongst them. But do we really step up to the plate when we need to for certain groups of people? But then he did go to court. So I did kind of feel like a redeeming quality for him. But then I think prior to the book, prior to you coming on, we all were kind of like, and then he just let it all go to heck and whiskey. What happened to him?
Yeah.
So it really wasn't necessarily a question, but it was more of a just kind of like what I thought about. I was like, wow, for him to do that, to really not help her. And then, so anyway, does that make sense? I'm sorry. That really wasn't a
Sure.
question. That's just kind of what my thoughts were about him. And I was kind of disappointed in him throwing in the towel. with the whiskey and all that. And I know alcoholism is the disease and all that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because that was that was a painful conclusion for me, but I had the written obituary, and in the book, that is exactly what his written obituary was. So I can only imagine his struggle. I can only imagine his ego and the hit that his ego took, thinking that the courts were going to somehow redeem him on what he felt. And to watch all of that just go, and then to be left on the short end of the stick with all of the men that he had known in business now rejecting him, and really, it must have been a real hard hit for him. It doesn't excuse the behavior, but I was able to have some compassion for him as I watched that happen.
Mhm.
Yeah, but he was an interesting. They didn't know much about him before he came, and they felt that perhaps he had been married before, but there was no documentation of any of that. So I just let that sit.
thank you.
I think as a non-writer, it would seem tricky to navigate blending fact and fiction. And I feel like you did such a good job of weaving those things together. What did your writing process look like for that? How did you decide what elements were factual that you wanted to include versus what you wanted to take liberties on in some regard?
You know, I really mean it when I say I do the research and then the character comes in and tells the story, and they use my information to tell their story. And I never know what they're going to use and what they're not going to use. But so I just let her go. And there was a lot that I had to cut from this manuscript, because she went on with a whole lot of other things that I would never have imagined. But once we did the editing, or one of the first drafts, I should say, one of the first drafts, Trish, my editor, said to me, well, why is she feeling that way? Why does she feel that strongly about these wolfers before they even get up to the Cypress Hills? And so I just sort of went back to her, and I just pick up my pencil and I say, okay, tell me. And she started to tell me about Stiller. Now, Stiller was fiction, but he wasn't fiction to her. And the description that she gave let me know right away that he was going to be involved in her story, and I had no idea of him. So that's kind of how it works. I just turn over my head and try to follow behind, and then watch her pick up those bits of information or explain things. When she would stop, it was because she would be in a situation that I didn't understand. And then I'd have to do deeper research to better understand her. And then she'd go on with the story again. Yeah.
I had just listened recently to an interview that you did with Cindy Burnett on the Thoughts from a Page podcast. And she was asking about your writing process. And I loved how you described setting the stage for the writing. And how you go about that. Are you able to talk more about the setting the stage and what you meant by that, and how, I don't know, I just thought it was so beautiful how you described it to her.
Well, I wish that I could remember how I described it so I could do it again.
Well,
But
there you go.
I can only tell you the truth. What I do is this intense research. And if I have any questions at all about something that I don't understand, or maybe I feel there's a nuance or it's a spiritual tradition that I don't understand, I right away would get a hold of one of my elders and ask them for description or an explanation.
Mhm.
And that would just be something that I would just compile. So I had loads and loads and loads of this, files and files of this. And then it comes down to when I have so much that I'm just full, I then can say to her, okay, where are you? Are you ready to go?
Mm.
and then just sort of turn it over for her. But I do see it as I'm a director in the sense that I need to educate myself about every tiny bit of what her culture is like and where she came from, and really give myself over to that, including the food, all of the details, the clothing, the lifestyle, the strength of the women, the position of the women in the tribe, things like that. And then I turn it over.
Mhm.
I hope that explains it.
Yeah, it's every writer, it seems that we talk to has their own process and how they go about things. And it's so
Yes.
fascinating to hear how everybody's brain works differently. And it sounds like you lay the groundwork and then you kind of pass the reins to the characters, and let them take it from there.
That's a really good way to put it. That's a good way to put it. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great.
Some people ask me if I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone?
No, go ahead.
Some people ask me if I channel, I've called this channeling, like I'm channeling the characters. And I say, I have no idea what that's about. I have no idea why this is the way I do what I do. It's just the way it happened for me. But early on after the Kitchen House, my editor said to me, the book clubs are going to be asking you, how did you write this book? And I thought, well, if I really tell them, they're going to think I'm crazy. I'm going to be telling them, how these characters came to me and how they take over the story. But before one of my very first book clubs, for no good reason, I was pacing in my room and I picked up the book, The Color Purple by Alice Walker, for no good reason. And I just paged to the back, and at the very back, she signed the book. She had AW for Alice Walker. She thanked the souls for coming through. And then she said AW, author and medium.
Mm.
And I thought, well, I'm in pretty good company here.
I'll say.
Yeah.
We had a question. Oh, go ahead,
Oh,
Ivana.
yeah. No, I was just saying, I love that explanation.
Mhm. We had a question from Michelle, and she is having some travel issues, but she had submitted a question on Instagram that I was going to share. She said, I'm wondering if you could ask a question I've been so curious about. Has Kathleen read 1000 White Women by Jim Fergus about the Brides for Indians government program? Did that history influence or inform the writing of Crow Mary? I haven't heard of this, but she was wondering if you had.
Yes. And as a matter of fact, he gave me a blurb for the back of the book.
Oh,
which I was thrilled about because I heard that he doesn't give blurbs. So, but I wanted to give it a try anyway. So he gave a wonderful blurb. Many, many years ago, when it first came out, it's quite old, I think. I read that book and I loved it, but I loved anything that would give me some insight into, now I know that was fiction, his was fiction, but to me, I could tell that it was based on research, that he had done his homework. And so, yes, I did enjoy that writing very, very much. Mhm. Whether it influenced me or not, how do we really know what influences us? Like maybe it did for me to feel like I had a shot at this. I have no idea. I just know that I was obsessed with Crow Mary as soon as I saw her and heard about her. And I knew that I was really I felt I was meant to tell her story.
Well, I bet you she's looking down on you and she's very proud, and I'm sure she appreciates all of this.
Ivana, when throughout this whole process, I've been introduced to many Crow people, but Diana Means is her great granddaughter. And Diana invited my husband and I, when we were out in Montana, to her home. Diana is Crow, and she was married to a Cheyenne man. They were so welcoming, and she made a special native pudding. And then there was a whole file that she did for me of all of the different Crow herbs, and she dried them for me, the herbs and flowers, and she dried them for me. I have this folder, and that educated me about what the Crow would have done with these. with these plant specimens. But while we were, then we took a walk out into the garden, and while we were talking, I said, well, can you tell me, like, what were you told about a goes first, about your great-great-grandmother? And she started to tell me different bits and pieces, and we both started to get these chills. I'm getting them right now. We both started to get these deep chills, and I had gotten them from the very beginning. That had happened for me with Crow Mary. Like I said, when I saw her standing on that docent on the hill, I just had this deep chill. That to me is her way of contacting me and letting me know that I'm doing an all right job. But Diana said, oh, let's stop, because her hair was just standing straight up on her arms. She said, this is freaking me out. This is freaking me out. So it was just kind of cute. Yeah. But I believe my goal was to do right by her. And I can only do my best. And I know I did my best. And now I have to just get out of the way. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's great universal advice, just applicable to so many things.
Well, yes, it is. But the trick is to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, easier said than done, right?
Well, Erin will tell you, Erin is on, she doesn't have her camera on, but she will tell you how we had this talk just today about checking, there she is. That's my daughter, and she does all of my social media for me. So, but we were talking just today about checking the numbers on Amazon, checking Goodreads. You know, even though I keep talking about how I'm getting out of the way and how I need to get out of the way, there's still that human part that comes in, and somehow you think that you should be running the show. And if I really believe what I'm saying, then that's a whole lot of nonsense. I need to get out of the way and stand behind that. Yeah, isn't always so easy.
I bet not. I bet. Sure, Kelly, do you want to ask another question?
What was the inspiration, or I loved, that was part of the story that I truly loved, was the relationship between Crow Mary and her friend Jeannie, and how she made her cards to learn how to read and write, and that they kept in touch. And that to me was just a beautiful relationship between them. And I didn't know if there was any background for that, or
I can't say that there was any background of documentation. But when she was telling her story, Jeannie was the first one that came up when she was newly married, and Jeannie showed up. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? But that was an instance where I had to go back and start doing some research, because Jeannie was Métis. And so I had to really understand what that meant. And that's a whole other culture that's very sophisticated and very intense in studying. So I had to study more about Jeannie before Crow Mary could move on with her story. But yeah, didn't you love her? I love Jeannie. Yeah. I had to edit out so much of their relationship. I hated to do it, but I had to do that. There are so many words. There are only so many words in the manuscript. Yeah.
well, I appreciated that relationship. It was beautiful.
I did too. Yeah.
Annette says she loves their friendship, and the rice and raisins was perfect.
So if you're interested, if you go onto the website, Erin and I have put together a whole for book clubs, and we have a recipe for rice and raisins on there. Yeah. We'll also be doing, while I'm thinking of it, we'll also be doing Behind the Book. I don't know if you followed with any of the other books, but on social media, there's something that we call Behind the Book. And that is through my research. With my research, I always have loads and loads of pictures. And we try to post a picture and then do an explanation about what that picture means. So if you are interested, that's going to be coming up on our social media soon. Yeah.
That's great to know.
Yeah, we'll be on the lookout for that.
Okay.
Are you able to share, I hate to even ask this because this was such a labor of love for you and took decades essentially, but is there anything else in the works for you right now that you are working on writing, or are you just going to focus on getting this one out into the world and celebrating that for a bit?
Yeah, well, I'm asked that often, and I think that that's just generally like, it's a general curious question. I have the same question for other people, right? Like, what are you working on now? But I've had long COVID, and so has Erin for that matter. And we've really been over the last 3 years struggling with that. So along with writing, I've been dealing with that. So I think that the goal is to do the promotion for this. And then in March of next year, the soft cover is coming out. So I'll probably do promotion for that. And then honestly, I really don't know what's coming after that. I really don't know. There are different ideas, but I really don't know.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry to hear that you guys have both struggled with that. That's so hard.
Yeah, the long COVID has not been a picnic, that's for sure. Yeah,
No.
but we're coming out on the other side,
Mhm.
finally.
Yes, and you deserve to celebrate getting this amazing work out into the world. And I'm like, I hate to even ask this question, because this was so many years in the making. But yeah, curious
No,
minds.
I don't think you should ever worry about asking questions of authors.
Mhm.
I think that when we agree to do events like this, where we, or at least for me, I feel that you have a right to ask these questions. I really do. I would like to feel that I would have a right to ask an author these questions. So I wouldn't hesitate to ask any questions you have. If I don't like to answer, I'll say, well, that's a little personal or something like that.
Yeah.
But with all of the book clubs that I've spoken to through the years, I don't think there has ever been a time that I have had to say that.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Good to know.
So don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We know that we said we would be on here for a half hour. I don't know if anybody else has anything that they'd like to ask before we let you go and, wrap up.
Sure. I'm open to any last questions for sure.
I would just like to say that I've been a fan forever, and I didn't get to ask any questions, but that's okay. This has been a joy. I think you are like the queen. And I just have to say that in today's culture, I'm thankful that you haven't faced any backlash, and it was really unique. Again, I have to say, in today's culture, to read the book having the family blessing beforehand. And I hate that has to be a thing, but it was also very cute and fun to see that montage video they put together of them all gathering and reading and celebrating your book. I don't know. I also think that it's really cool that you do this, letting the character get in you. I don't think there should be any fear of you saying that you could possibly be a medium. I think that's the neatest thing I think I've ever heard in an author interview.
Really? Well,
Yes.
First I'd like to ask you, what montage are you talking about?
Someone shared it and I thought it came from your page, but apparently the family had a video montage that they had put on either TikTok or Instagram. Did you all see that? Yeah. So I think it was shared in our group.
Can send it. I'll send it to you.
You're shaking your head as though you've seen it.
Yeah.
It's sitting there shaking her head. Sure.
It's Nedra's daughter-in-law that paints.
Yes.
Little montage of the painting that she did of Crow Mary.
And sent to me. Yes.
It was, yeah. So, and there was a little montage of them like reading the book and all of them gathering.
Lori,
I think it's such a showing to you that, wow, you did such a great job, when in this day and age, we have such a criticism of authors who say do a book and they have no business doing the book, right? So I think that was like kudos to the queen, Kathleen, that you did such an awesome job representing.
Well, thank you, but let me assure you, I am not a queen. I'm just a normal woman who happens to write some books, and that's just the truth. But would one of you send that link if you can?
yes.
I'm going to hold you responsible because you're the one shaking your head the most.
I found it. I will send it to you and Erin.
Oh, that would be wonderful. I'd love to see that.
TK
Yes.
Brown, right? Is that the TK Brown art? I think that's
Yeah.
Yes, that would be her.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you look at her page, she has several different paintings.
okay. Yeah, that's great.
Oh, wonderful, yes. And then the cover was done by Kevin Redstar, who is a crow artist as well. He's a well-known crow artist. You can Google him and you can see him. But I was thrilled with that they were able to do that they were able to get him.
Beautiful.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, speaking of cover, should we grab a quick picture?
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh. We love to
That's
take a picture at the end of our author chats so that we can.
Oh, yes. And would you send that to me as well?
Yes, absolutely.
We can
Absolutely.
put it on our social media.
Yes. And if you have your books, let me get my screenshot set up. This took me like, I don't know, a year to learn how to do.
I still don't know, so.
Well, I'm glad you know how to do it because I don't.
Okay. All right. I'll count. Ready? 1, 2, smile, 3. There it is. Awesome. I will send you all of that stuff.
Well, thank you, Ivana. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you for doing this.
Thank
You know what this means to an author. I'm sure you know what this means to an author. But to just have these faces looking at me with smiles and interest means so much to me. And I really, really appreciate it. I really do. So thank you.
A lot of us are also very starstruck to see you and talk to you. So you make us smile.
Now that makes me smile. That makes me smile.
Thank
Okay,
you.
well.
And thanks, Erin, too, for everything.
So does anyone have a last question? I don't want anyone to leave. I see Porter's mom, who was so sweet before. And you said you didn't have a chance to ask a question. Did you have a question?
I mean, no, essentially Kelly asked it. You answered
Sorry.
one part. No, that's
your
okay.
thunder.
It was essentially one part. It just, I had expressed how this really read like a memoir. And so I was just curious. I ended up doing audio because it was a last minute join in. So I didn't have any physical copy of the book to see if there was any mention of that, but I will head to your website to see all of these photos and things, because I just didn't know how far her story told in you was different from some of the facts. So that was it. Just what was fact, what was fiction, but it read so well like a memoir that I kind of want to pretend like the whole thing was real.
Well, she was real. She was real.
Right.
And she has left some wonderful people in her wake.
Yes.
She really, her ancestors are just wonderful people. So strong. Nedra is strong. I have a picture of Nedra on the website. If you go to Crow Marion, and there will be other pictures, so you'll see other pictures. There's one. I pulled it out, and I'm going to show. I don't know if you can see this or not. Can you see that?
Oh,
Yes.
yeah.
That is
Wow.
Crow Marion with Susie when she was little. But that picture is on the website, so you'll see that.
Thank you for that knowledge.
Well, thank you so much, Kathleen. Your time was such a gift to us, and we're so thankful.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to stop recording.